Ever notice something fascinating? Every generation thinks the one after them is confusing. Boomers say they're soft, millennials say they're chaotic, companies say they're impossible to manage. But here's the truth no one slows down to examine. Gen Z isn't complicated. They're psychologically logical. To understand them, you have to start with a screen. Picture this. It's 2012. You're 12 years old. Your phone isn't just a phone. It's your school hallway, your social circle, your news channel, your stage, your diary, and your mirror. For Gen Z, born roughly between 1997 and 2012, the internet wasn't invented during their childhood. It was already there. They didn't log on. They arrived connected. And that single difference shaped everything. The first fully digital nervous system. Previous generations used technology. Gen Z developed inside it. Their brains formed alongside constant information flow, notifications, messages, algorithms predicting what they want before they know it. Psychologists call this continuous partial attention, being mildly alert to everything at once. Their nervous systems adapted. They scroll fast, think fast, process fast, lose interest fast. It's not laziness, it's neurological efficiency. When your brain grows up filtering thousands of stimuli per hour, depth feels different. Attention becomes selective. If something doesn't grab you immediately, it disappears. That's not impatience, that's adaptation. The anxiety generation? Now let's talk about the statistic everyone quotes. Gen Z reports higher levels of anxiety and depression than previous generations at the same age. Older generations ask what happened. Here's what happened. They are the first generation raised in permanent comparison mode. At 13, you don't just compare yourself to classmates. You compare yourself to influencers in Dubai, entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, fitness models in Brazil, activists in New York, millionaires your age on TikTok. The comparison field expanded from 30 people to 3 billion. Psychologically, that changes identity development. Adolescence is already the stage where humans ask, "Who am I?" Gen Z asked that question while algorithms constantly answered, "Here's who you could be." That pressure rewired self-perception. But here's what most people miss. They are not weaker. They are more self-aware. Previous generations had anxiety too, they just didn't label it. Gen Z grew up in the therapy era. Mental health language became mainstream. Words like boundaries, trauma, gaslighting, and narcissism entered everyday vocabulary. They don't hide emotional discomfort, they name it. That feels dramatic to older generations, but psychologically, it's literacy. The real reason they reject hustle culture. Older generations often complain Gen Z doesn't want to work. But look at what they watched growing up. They saw millennials burn out chasing corporate loyalty. They watched parents stress over mortgages during the 2008 financial crisis. They saw student loan debt explode. They witnessed layoffs during the global pandemic. They learned something early. Stability is not guaranteed. So instead of asking, "How can I climb the ladder?" they ask, "Is the ladder even leaning against the right wall?" Psychologists would call this value-based decision-making. Gen Z prioritizes flexibility, meaning, mental health, autonomy. Not because they're lazy, because they saw what happens when work consumes identity. They're less willing to sacrifice well-being for status. That's not entitlement, it's strategic self-preservation. Why they care so much about identity. Notice something else? Gen Z talks about identity constantly. Gender identity, cultural identity, neurodiversity, personal branding, micro-communities. Why? Because in a digital world, identity is currency. When everyone has a platform, differentiation matters. Psychologically, Gen Z grew up in what researchers call a networked individualism culture. Instead of belonging to one local tribe, a neighborhood, a church, a school, they belong to multiple micro-tribes online. Gaming communities, fandoms, political spaces, creative circles, niche humor pages. This creates flexibility, but it also creates fragmentation. So they search deeply for authenticity. That's why they're hypersensitive to hypocrisy, why they cancel quickly, why they fact-check publicly. When your social environment is massive, trust becomes selective. They test alignment. The humor that confuses everyone. Let's talk about their humor. Absurd, self-deprecating, layered in irony, sometimes dark. To older generations, it feels chaotic, but psychologically, it's a coping mechanism for uncertainty. Gen Z grew up with climate crisis headlines, school shooting drills, political polarization, economic instability, a global pandemic during formative years. When uncertainty is constant, humor becomes existential. Instead of saying everything feels unstable, they say we're all just side characters in a simulation. It sounds unserious, but it's emotional regulation. Humor creates psychological distance from fear. It makes overwhelming problems temporarily manageable. Why they move on so quickly? Ever notice how fast trends die now? Songs blow up in a week, memes last days, careers skyrocket and collapse overnight. Gen Z doesn't cling, they pivot, because they learned early that digital relevance is temporary. Their adaptability is extraordinary. They can learn platforms quickly, rebrand instantly, acquire skills from YouTube, start businesses from their phones. This generation is self-taught at scale. Their classroom wasn't confined to four walls, it was global. That flexibility will likely become their greatest long-term strength. The loneliness paradox. Now here's the contradiction. They are the most connected generation in history and one of the loneliest. Why? Because digital interaction stimulates the brain socially but not always emotionally. You can receive 200 likes and still feel unseen. Psychologists describe this as ambient intimacy, the illusion of closeness without depth. Gen Z understands this tension better than anyone. That's why you see a quiet countertrend, digital detoxes, desire for small friend groups, interest in slow living, return to hobbies like reading, journaling, crafting. They're experimenting with balance in real time. The myth of fragility. Perhaps the most misunderstood label attached to Gen Z is this: they're fragile. But look closer. They openly discuss trauma. They challenge authority. They question systems. They leave toxic workplaces. They demand representation. That's not fragility, that's boundary setting. Previous generations were taught endurance. Gen Z is practicing discernment. There's a difference. Endurance says survive it. Discernment says, is this worth surviving? That question alone shifts culture. Their relationship with success. For Gen Z, success is less about prestige and more about alignment. They grew up watching influencers earn money independently, so the traditional formula degree to job to 40 years to retirement doesn't feel sacred, it feels optional. This psychological shift creates experimentation. Some fail publicly, some pivot repeatedly, some create unconventional careers. But underneath it all is one core belief: life is customizable. That mindset is powerful and destabilizing because unlimited choice increases both freedom and anxiety. The core psychology of Gen Z. If you had to summarize Gen Z's psychology in one sentence, it might be this: they are navigating infinite possibility under constant visibility. They grew up observed, compared, connected, informed, and uncertain. So they built tools, emotional vocabulary, digital fluency, adaptive identity, boundary awareness, irony as protection, community beyond geography. They are not the downfall of culture. They are the first humans fully shaped by a digital civilization. And like every first generation of a new era, they look confusing. But confusion doesn't mean dysfunction. It means transition. The quiet strength beneath the noise. Here's the part rarely acknowledged. Gen Z is deeply empathetic. They mobilize quickly for causes. They crowdsource support. They raise awareness instantly. They amplify marginalized voices. They may communicate in memes, but they organize in minutes. They may reject traditional hierarchies, but they build horizontal communities. They may question everything, but questioning is how systems evolve. The bridge to the future. Every generation solves the problem it inherits. Gen X mastered independence. Millennials mastered ambition. Gen Z may master integration. balancing mental health with productivity, technology with humanity, individuality with community. They're still experimenting, and experiments look messy while they're happening, but psychologically, they are adapting to a world that changes faster than any before it, and adaptation is intelligence. So maybe instead of asking what's wrong with Gen Z, we ask what world shaped them, because generations are not accidents, they are reflections. If this breakdown of the easy psychology behind Gen Z helped you see them differently, like this video and subscribe to Psychology of Easy for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.